I'm Ethan Richards. I'm 22 years old, and my parents stole my entire $180,000 college fund to finance my brother's sham startup. Before I tell you how I legally took back everything they thought they owned, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It all started on what should have been the best day of my life, a perfect Tuesday in early May. The email landed in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart slam against my ribs. MIT Robotics Program. An offer of admission. The letters MIT seemed to glow on the screen. I'd done it. All those years of turning down parties for late nights in the lab, of living on caffeine and smelling faintly of solder, of sketching designs on napkins until my fingers cramped. It had all culminated in this single, beautiful moment. My future wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality, a shimmering path to everything I had ever worked for. I shot out of my chair and ran downstairs, clutching my phone like it was a winning lottery ticket. Mom, Dad, you're not going to believe this. I found them in the living room. The heavy silence in the room was the first red flag. The television was off. My dad, Richard, a man who lived and breathed financial news, wasn't watching the stock ticker. He was staring intently at the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, the one he was so proud of. My mom, Diana, was seated perfectly straight on our expensive leather couch, her hands clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles were bone white. They looked like they were waiting for a doctor to deliver a terminal diagnosis. My triumphant grin faltered. What's wrong? Ethan, sit down, my dad said, his voice a low, gravelly thing I hardly recognized. We need to talk to you. I sank into the armchair opposite them, the celebratory energy draining out of me, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The acceptance email on my phone suddenly felt foolish. Son, he began, finally dragging his gaze up from the floor to meet mine. His eyes were pools of practiced sadness. It was a masterful performance. There's no easy way to say this. We've had a financial catastrophe. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice small. It's your education fund. My mom chimed in, her voice calibrated to the perfect pitch of gentle sorrow. We had it in what we thought was a secure investment vehicle, an emerging tech fund. It was supposed to be the next big thing. But the market, it turned so suddenly. It was a complete wipeout, Ethan. The fund is gone. All of it. Gone. The word didn't compute. $180,000. My entire future. You don't just lose a sum like that like you lose your car keys. We feel sick about it, my dad added, shaking his head slowly, the picture of paternal regret. We wanted to give you the world, son. But this is a lesson in how harsh the real world can be. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. We will get through this. You're a resilient kid. You could go to community college for a year or two. Build character. It's not the end of the world. Build character. The phrase hung in the air, thick and insulting. My life's work, my ticket to one of the best engineering schools on the planet, was being casually dismissed and replaced with a platitude. As if on cue, the front door burst open and my older brother, Tyler, swaggered in. He was 24, armed with a business degree and an ego the size of Texas. He was talking loudly into a brand new, top-of-the-line iPhone, a gleaming MacBook Pro tucked under his other arm. He ended his call with a self-satisfied laugh and surveyed the somber scene in the living room. Who died? He asked, his grin wide. My mother's face, which had been a mask of tragedy, instantly softened into adoration. Oh, Tyler, honey, we were just giving Ethan some difficult family news. Tyler's gaze flickered to me. For a split second, I saw it. A glint of pure, unadulterated triumph in his eyes. He masked it instantly, replacing it with a look of cursory pity. He sauntered over and clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a shove. Hey, rough break, little brother. Seriously. But hey, Dad's right. You're the brains of the family. You'll figure something out. He then spun around to face our parents, his voice booming with unchecked excitement. Speaking of figuring things out, the seed funding officially cleared this morning. Every last penny. NextGen Solutions is officially a go. My parents' faces transformed. The grief vanished, replaced by radiant pride. "Oh, Tyler, that's wonderful," my mother gushed. My father stood up and gave him a proud hug. They were celebrating his new venture, his seed funding, standing on the fresh grave of my dreams. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening certainty. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The catastrophe wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction, an inside job, and I was the one who had been sold out. The days that followed were a masterclass in gaslighting. My family moved around me with a cloying, suffocating sympathy. My mother would leave plates of my favorite food outside my door. My father would leave pamphlets for Northwood Community College on my desk, circled with encouraging notes like, "Great business program." It was a performance, and I was the unwilling audience. The official admissions packet from MIT arrived in a thick, crisp envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, a relic from an alternate reality where my life hadn't been derailed. I opened it in the privacy of my room. The glossy brochures, the letter from the head of the robotics department, the congratulatory notes, they were all invitations to a future that had been stolen from me. I remember tracing the MIT logo with my finger, the sharp edges of the letters feeling like a paper cut on my soul. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, so I shoved it into the back of a drawer, a secret I kept from my family and from myself. I tried to pretend things were normal. I'd go to the university lab, my home away from home for the last 4 years. But the familiar, comforting hum of servers and 3D printers now grated on my nerves. I would sit in front of a complex robotics problem that would have fascinated me a week ago, and my mind was just static. What was the point? Why design a better world when my own had been so thoroughly corrupted? The isolation was crushing. I thought about calling my ex-girlfriend, Sarah. We'd ended on good terms, a classic case of right person, wrong time as we headed off to different corners of the country for college. She was always my rock, the one person who understood my passion. I picked up the phone a dozen times but always put it down. What could I say? "Hey, remember that bright future we both had? Well, mine's been canceled." The shame was too heavy. One night, I couldn't take the suffocating atmosphere of my house anymore. I drove to the campus, the streets empty and slick with a light rain. The engineering building was a dark monolith against the night sky. On impulse, I swiped my student keycard. The lock clicked green. The hallways were eerily silent, my footsteps echoing like accusations. I was drawn to the one place that had always made sense. The robotics lab. The door was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light cut through the darkness. Pushing it open, I saw Professor Jenkins sitting in his small, cluttered office. He was a legend in the field, a man whose kindness was as renowned as his intellect. He'd mentored me since my freshman year, seeing a spark in me that I didn't even know I had. A half-empty mug of tea sat next to a stack of fluid dynamics textbooks. He looked up from his papers, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Ethan, it's a late night for problem solving." I couldn't form words. I just shook my head, a wave of despair washing over me. "Sit," he said softly, gesturing to the worn armchair opposite his desk. The moment I sat down, the dam broke. The carefully constructed facade of stoicism I'd been wearing for days crumbled. I told him everything. The rehearsed speech from my parents. The lost fund. The casual cruelty of my brother's celebration. The community college pamphlets. I laid out the whole ugly, pathetic story, my voice cracking. He listened without interruption, his gaze steady and patient. He didn't offer a single empty platitude. When I finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, he took a slow sip of his tea. "An engineering problem at its core is a question of integrity," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Does the structure have integrity? Will it hold the weight it's designed to bear? If there is a flaw, a weakness, the entire structure is compromised. You don't ignore the flaw, Ethan. You find it." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Let us examine the integrity of this story. Your father, a meticulous financial consultant who preaches risk aversion, makes a single catastrophic investment with your entire future. Your brother, A young man of great charm but little discipline simultaneously secures full seed funding for a new venture? The inputs do not logically lead to the outputs. The structure is flawed. What am I supposed to do? I whispered. It's their word against mine. You are thinking like a son, he said, his voice firm but kind. A son who has been hurt. That is understandable. But now you must think like the engineer you are. An engineer does not accept a flawed design. He interrogates it. He tests it for stress points. He gathers data. Stop grieving the structure that has collapsed. Start drafting the blueprints for a new one. I left his office an hour later, my head spinning. He hadn't given me a solution. He'd given me a methodology. He had reframed my personal tragedy as a technical problem. A problem that had a solution if I was smart enough to find it. The next day, I told my parents I was going to stay with my best friend, Marcus, for a while. I just need some space to process everything, I said, my voice carefully neutral. They were visibly relieved. My moping was clearly ruining their victory lap. Marcus's basement became my war room. He was a comp-sci wizard, and his setup of monitors and servers looked like it could launch a satellite. When I laid out the whole story, including Professor Jenkins' analysis, his face hardened. Dude, it's not even a question, he said, grabbing a marker and turning to the massive whiteboard on his wall. It's a heist. Let's map the data flow. For the next 2 hours, we weren't two college kids. We were a forensics team. We drew flowcharts. We created timelines. T-4 weeks. Tyler finalizes his business plan. T-3 weeks. My college fund, account #XXXX, is closed. Sum, $180,000. T-3 weeks, plus 24 hours. A new business account for NextGen Solutions is opened. Initial deposit, $180,000. We didn't know the last part for sure, but it was the only hypothesis that fit all the facts. We diagrammed the personalities, the motivations. My father's desire for a legacy through his successful son. My mother's blind adoration for her golden child. Tyler's deep-seated jealousy of my academic achievements. Looking at the board, at the cold, hard lines connecting the dots, the last vestiges of my grief burned away, leaving something else in their place. Cold, crystalline anger. Purpose. I can't go to them with this, I said, my voice quiet. They'll just deny it. They'll call me crazy, ungrateful. So you don't go to them, Marcus said, turning to face me. You go around them. You need proof. Undeniable, hard copy proof. You need to become a ghost, a detective. You need to find the transaction records. He was right. This was no longer a family dispute. It was an investigation. My parents and my brother thought they had buried my future. They had no idea I was about to start digging. My transformation from victim to investigator began with a memory of my grandmother. Helen was a force of nature, a child of the Depression. She trusted tangible assets and verifiable facts, not promises. When she saw me getting obsessed with computers as a teen, she didn't just encourage it. She taught me its foundation. A computer never truly forgets, Ethan, she'd say, peering over my shoulder. People lie. Data doesn't. You just have to know how to ask it the right questions. She had bought me my first data recovery software, teaching me how deleted files were just pointers to data waiting to be overwritten. She called it digital archaeology. Our family had an old iMac in the study, a communal dumping ground for photos, homework, and my mom's real estate work. I knew Tyler, being too lazy to maintain his own backups, had used it heavily before he got his shiny new MacBook. It was a long shot, but it was the only door I had a potential key to. 2 nights after my strategy session with Marcus, I put my plan into action. I waited until I was sure my parents were asleep, then drove to the house, parking a block away. I let myself in with my key, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. I felt like a burglar in my own home. In the study, the iMac hummed softly. I plugged in my external hard drive and ran the recovery software, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The screen filled with a cascade of file names, a ghost library of my family's digital life. I filtered the results, searching for anything created by Tyler in the last 6 months. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then a cluster of files appeared. Folder name, NextGen deleted. My breath hitched. With a trembling hand, I initiated the recovery. The progress bar was a thin blue line of hope. I didn't dare examine the files there. I copied the entire recovered directory, ejected the drive, and slipped out of the house as silently as I came. The drive felt warm in my pocket, a tiny ember of truth. Back in Marcus's basement, the sanctuary felt a world away from the tension of that house. I plugged in the drive and opened the folder. It was a digital timeline of Tyler's deception. The early drafts of his business plan were pathetic, filled with generic marketing speak and vague promises. But as I clicked on the more recent versions, a cold dread washed over me. The technical sections, the supposed secret sauce of his startup, were my words. He had lifted entire paragraphs verbatim from my MIT application essays and my senior research proposal. The schematics were crudely modified versions of my own CAD drawings for a robotic manipulator arm I'd been perfecting for 2 years. He hadn't just taken my money. He had skinned my mind and was wearing it as a costume. The rage was so intense it made me dizzy. How? My laptop was encrypted, my files password protected. I dug deeper into the recovered files, looking for clues. I found a small text document, created a month before the fund vanished. It was named _passwords.txt. I opened it. Inside was a short list: my university portal login, my cloud storage password, and the admin password for my personal laptop. It was Helen's Way 1945, my grandmother's name and her birth year. Password I had thought was clever and sentimental. A password I had given to only one person on Earth, in a sealed envelope, just in case of emergency. My mother. The betrayal was a physical blow. I pushed my chair back from the desk, a strangled sound escaping my throat. It wasn't just Tyler, the jealous brother. It was my mother. The woman who was supposed to be my fiercest protector had been the one to lower the castle gates and let the enemy in. She had smiled at me, hugged me, told me she loved me, all while holding the knife that she'd let my brother stick in my back. This was proof for me, but it wasn't proof for a court. A lawyer could argue it was a family helping family, that I had consented. I needed something cold, hard, and financial. I needed to follow the money. That brought me to Jessica Palmer, my dad's assistant. I remembered the incident at the company picnic vividly. My dad, trying to cover a trading error, had publicly blamed her. Jessica must have misplaced the order, he'd said with that charming, dismissive smile of his. But the firm's senior partner, a man who didn't suffer fools, had investigated and found the error was my dad's. He'd apologized to Jessica in front of everyone. My dad never did. Jessica had just stood there, her expression unreadable, but I saw the flicker of contempt in her eyes. She was smart, she was wronged, and she probably had no love lost for my father. She was my only shot. Approaching her was delicate. A direct accusation would scare her off. I had to play the part of the concerned, naive son. I found her on a professional networking site and sent a connection request. The message was carefully crafted. Hi Jessica. Ethan Richards here. My dad's son. I'm trying to sort out some financial aid paperwork and I'm a bit lost. I was hoping you could help me with a question about a family trust account. It's a bit sensitive and I didn't want to bother my dad with it while he's so stressed. She accepted within the hour. Her reply was cautious. I can try to help, Ethan. What do you need? I took a deep breath and laid the trap. It's about my college fund, the one that was in a custodial trust. My parents told me it was wiped out in the market, and I need the final closing statement for my student loan applications. To prove I have no assets. Would it be possible for you to pull the final statement of account for the Ethan Richards Education Trust? I just need the official document showing the closing balance and date of closure. It was the perfect bait. I wasn't asking for anything suspicious. I was asking for a document that a grieving son trying to get a loan would plausibly need. The request itself was a testament to my supposed defeat. The typing indicator on the messaging app blinked on and off for what felt like an eternity. She was thinking, weighing the risk. Finally, her message appeared. "That's an unusual request to come through me, but I remember your father closing that account a few weeks back. He said it was being rolled over. Let me see what I can dig up from the digital archives. It might take me a day or so." The next 24 hours were a special kind of hell. Every email notification, every text message sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Couldn't eat. I couldn't think about anything else. Marcus tried to distract me with video games, but I just stared at the screen, my phone clutched in my hand. At 4:15 p.m. the next day, an email arrived. The sender was a string of random characters from a Proton mail address. The subject line was empty. My hands were slick with sweat as I clicked it open. There were no words, just a single solitary attachment. A PDF file named statement_trust.pdf. I downloaded it. I opened it. My world stopped. It was the official bank statement, clean and undeniable. At the top, Ethan Richards Education Trust. Below, a list of transactions. For years, there were only deposits from my parents and grandparents. Then, a single entry, dated May 12th. Type, wire transfer. Amount, $180,000. My eyes scanned across the line, past the transaction ID to the final column. Destination account holder. And there, in crisp, black digital print, were the words that sealed their fate. NextGen Solutions, LLC. I didn't shout. I didn't cheer. I just printed the page. I held the warm paper in my hand. It was the truth, distilled onto a single sheet. The cold anger that had been simmering inside me finally cooled and solidified into something unbreakable. I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do next. My grandmother hadn't just left me memories and lessons. She had left me a contingency plan. A shoebox, sealed with tape, in the back of my closet. Her words from the Christmas before she passed away echoed in my mind. "Ethan, life can be a storm. Most of the time you can navigate it. But if you ever find yourself in a hurricane, one you truly can't see your way out of, open this box." The hurricane was here. It was time to open the box. That night, I made my final clandestine trip to the house on Elm Street. The act of entering my own home like a thief was becoming morbidly familiar. The shoebox was where I'd left it, a dusty cardboard rectangle buried under the innocent debris of my childhood. Carrying it out of the house, I felt a definitive shift. I wasn't just taking something. I was leaving a part of myself behind, the naive son who believed in the integrity of his family. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Marcus's basement, I set the box on the table. It was unassuming, but it felt like a weapon. The old masking tape, yellowed with age, peeled away with a dry, satisfying rip. The contents weren't what a kid would dream of. No pirate gold or bundles of cash. It was something far more powerful. A meticulously organized portfolio of legal documents. My grandmother had been playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. On top was a thick manila envelope with my name on it in her elegant, deliberate cursive. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank and a business card for a man named Solomon Graham, an attorney with a prestigious downtown firm. Beneath the envelope lay a file folder, heavy with deeds, stock certificates, and a professionally bound copy of her last will and testament. I started reading, my initial confusion giving way to a slow dawning, seismic shock. When my parents bought their big house in Connecticut, they hadn't had enough for the down payment. Grandma Helen had provided the funds, not as a gift, not as a loan, but as an investment. The paperwork was ironclad. Title deeds, co-ownership agreements, all signed and notarized. My grandmother, Helen Richards, was the legal co-owner of 40% of their property, of the very house they were living in. But she didn't stop there. Her will was a masterpiece of strategic foresight. It dictated that upon her death, her entire estate, her 40% share of the house, a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks she'd been building since the 1970s, and the contents of that safe deposit box, was to be consolidated into a single entity, the Helen Richards Trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust was me. And the trustee, the man legally bound to protect the trust and its beneficiary, was Solomon Graham. My parents knew about the trust in a vague sense. They thought it was a small inheritance I'd get at 25. They clearly had no idea that it was woven into the very fabric of their financial lives, that Grandma's gift had been a Trojan horse of accountability. The next morning, my hand was steady as I dialed Solomon Graham's office. His secretary was a gatekeeper of the old school, polite but firm. Mr. Graham's schedule was booked solid for the next 3 months. "Please," I said, my voice low and urgent. "My name is Ethan Richards. I am Helen Richards' grandson. It is regarding the trust she established. It's an emergency." There was a pause. "Hold, please." I expected a long wait, a brush off. Less than a minute later, a deep, resonant voice came on the line. A voice that carried the weight of decades of authority. "Mr. Richards, Solomon Graham. I had a feeling you would be calling." His office was exactly as I'd imagined. Walls of mahogany and leather-bound law books, a quiet, commanding space high above the city. He was in his 70s, sharp and immaculate in a 3-piece suit, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He already had a duplicate copy of my grandmother's file open on his vast desk. "Your grandmother," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "was one of the sharpest clients I have ever had the privilege of representing. She believed in preparing for every eventuality. She loved you dearly, Ethan, but she was not a sentimentalist. She was a pragmatist." He cut straight to the chase. "As you now know, I am the trustee of your inheritance. The current net value of the Helen Richards Trust, factoring in the property's market value and the portfolio, is approximately $320,000. The number hung in the air. I felt a wave of vertigo. "However," he continued, his tone becoming more serious, "the trust comes with carefully constructed bylaws. Your grandmother's primary instruction was to ensure your well-being and future success. As long as your parents were fulfilling their fiduciary duties as your guardians." My hands were tied. "The majority of the trust was to remain under my management until you turned 25. He leaned forward, locking his gaze on mine. "But she prepared for this eventuality. The will contains a specific provision. If evidence emerges that your guardians are acting in a manner that constitutes a direct threat to the future the trust is designed to protect, I, as trustee, am empowered to take immediate and decisive action. This can include the full, early liquidation of the trust's assets for your direct benefit." "They are a threat," I said, my voice gaining strength. "They stole my separate college fund to give to my brother. An accusation, however true, is not a legal case," he countered gently. "The burden of proof would be on us. We would need to present the court with a clear, compelling narrative of financial malfeasance." I reached into my backpack and, one by one, laid out my evidence on his polished desk. The printouts of Tyler's business plan with my work highlighted, the recovered text file with the passwords, and finally the bank statement, the smoking gun. He put on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses and examined each document with methodical silence. He lingered on the bank statement, his expression unreadable. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me, a slow, grim smile forming on his lips. "Her foresight was remarkable," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "She knew the character of her son, and she had faith in yours." He tapped the bank statement. "This is our foundation. It's more than enough to petition the court for an emergency hearing." He became all business. "This will be a declaration of war, Ethan. There is no going back from this. Are you prepared for that?" "They threw the first punch," I said. "I'm just here to finish the fight." "Good," he said with a decisive nod. "Here is our strategy. First, we make you untouchable. Your independence is our primary weapon. You mentioned MIT. Have you considered other elite programs?" "I've been looking at scholarships," I said. "Caltech has a presidential scholarship. It's a long shot." "Then shoot," he commanded. "Apply to Caltech. Apply to Stanford. Apply to Carnegie Mellon. And acceptance, especially with a scholarship, is not just an academic achievement. It is a legal statement. It proves you have a brilliant future that is being actively endangered. It gives a judge a tangible reason to act in your favor. While you build your academic fortress, I will draft the legal siege weapons. We will not move until every piece is perfectly in place. We will act from a position of unassailable strength. I left his office walking on air. The weight of victimhood had been lifted, replaced by the power of a plan. I wasn't a wrong child anymore. I was a client, an asset holder, a plaintiff. I spent the next 2 weeks in a blur of focused activity, writing essays, securing recommendation letters, and launching a volley of applications to the best engineering schools in the country. At home, I was a ghost. I played the role of the defeated son, nodding along as my parents discussed the pros and cons of different community colleges. They thought they were designing my cage. They had no idea I was forging the key. The email that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was in my room, half-heartedly browsed the Northwood Community College website as a form of camouflage. The subject line was deceptively simple: your application to the California Institute of Technology. My heart felt like it stopped beating for a second. With a deep breath, I clicked it open. The words swam before my eyes. Dear Mr. Richards, on behalf of the admissions committee, my great pleasure to offer you a place. Furthermore, we are delighted to award you the Presidential Scholarship, which covers the full cost of tuition and fees, and includes an annual stipend of $25,000 for living expenses and research. I fell back in my chair, the air rushing out of my lungs. The full ride, the stipend. They weren't just accepting me. They were paying me to come. It was validation. It was freedom. It was the final, critical piece of the plan Solomon Graham had helped me devise. My future was now completely, utterly independent of my family. It was a fortress they could never breach. I immediately forwarded the acceptance email to Solomon with a 3-word message: the fortress is built. His reply was almost instantaneous. Excellent. I'll have the final documents couriered to you tomorrow for your signature. The operation commences Friday. Be ready. The next 2 days were surreal. I moved through my house like an actor in the final scenes of a play. The only one who knew the curtain was about to fall. I ate dinner with my family, the conversation a symphony of obliviousness. My mother chattered about a new house she was listing. My father complained about a dip in the Dow Jones. Tyler, my brother, the cause of all this, went on and on about the brilliant new programmer he'd hired for his company. A programmer whose salary was being paid with the interest that should have been accumulating in my college fund. Their casual, self-absorbed cruelty was breathtaking. They were so secure in their lies, so confident in my subjugation. Thursday night, they called me down for what my father termed a financial planning session. It was the perfect stage for their final act of condescension. We sat in the living room, in the exact same configuration as the day they had shattered my world. "All right, Ethan," my dad said, adopting his most paternal, man-of-the-house tone. He slid a neat stack of papers across the polished coffee table. "I've taken the liberty of preparing the loan applications for Northwood Community College. After running the numbers, a $30,000 loan should be more than sufficient for the full 2-year program. Your mother and I will, of course, co-sign. A formality. We just need you to sign on the dotted lines." He leaned back, a smug, benevolent smile on his face. He was the generous king, bestowing upon me the gift of debt to pay for the scraps of an education, after he'd stolen the feast I'd prepared for myself. I looked down at the papers. I saw the ridiculously high interest rate. I saw my name waiting to be signed next to my father's, shackling me to them for the next decade. I looked up and met my father's expectant gaze. I saw my mother's encouraging smile. I saw Tyler, lounging on the other couch, scrolling through his phone, utterly bored by the proceedings of my ruined life. In that moment, a profound and icy calm settled over me. I didn't say a word. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, turned my back on them, and walked up the stairs to my room. "Ethan, where are you going?" My father's voice, sharp with annoyance, followed me. "We're not finished here. Get back down here and sign these papers. I closed my bedroom door, shutting out his voice. My bags, packed for a week, were hidden in the back of my closet. My war was not going to be won by shouting. It was going to be won by strategy and a quiet, devastating exit. I waited until 2:30 a.m. The house was submerged in the deep silence of the suburbs. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary and my prison. I felt a pang of genuine grief, not for the people in this house, but for the illusion of the family I thought I had. On my neatly made bed, I placed a single, crisp white envelope. Then, with my backpack on and my future in my pocket, I walked out of that house for the last time. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace. Marcus was waiting at the end of the street, his car's engine a low hum in the night. I slid into the passenger seat, and we pulled away from the curb, not looking back. As we turned the corner, the house on Elm Street disappeared from the rearview mirror. I knew the chaos that would erupt in a few hours. My mother would go to my room, ready to hustle me off to the bank to sign my life away. She would find the empty space, and she would find the letter. I had rewritten it a dozen times until it was perfect. It was not a plea. It was not a cry for help. It was a legal declaration, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. To Richard and Diana, it began, dispensing with the familial titles they had forfeited. This letter is to formally inform you of my permanent departure from this address. I will not be attending Northwood Community College, nor will I be taking out any student loans under your co-signature. This fall, I will be attending the California Institute of Technology. I have been awarded the Presidential Scholarship, which covers all tuition and expenses. This is also to inform you that I am fully aware of the disposition of my $180,000 education fund. I have in my possession bank statements confirming the wire transfer of the full amount from my trust to Tyler's shell company, NextGen Solutions, on May 12th. Furthermore, I have evidence that the core intellectual property of said company was stolen directly from my personal research, an act facilitated by Diana, who provided Tyler with my encrypted passwords. Finally, please be advised that I have retained the services of Mr. Solomon Graham of the firm Graham, Wexler and Associates. As you are aware, my grandmother, Helen Richards, was a 40% co-owner of the property at 18 Elm Street. Her equity is the primary asset of a trust established for my benefit. Given your demonstrable actions of financial malfeasance and gross breach of your parental fiduciary duties, my attorney has, as of this morning, filed an emergency petition with the state court. This petition demands the immediate forced sale of the property in order to liquidate the trust's assets and secure my inheritance. You can expect to be served with the official court documents within 24 hours. You once told me I was resilient. You were correct. It was the only truth you've told me in months. Ethan. As Marcus and I were driving through the pre-dawn darkness of Pennsylvania, my phone, which I had left on for this specific purpose, began to scream. A barrage of calls. My mother, her voice a hysterical shriek on the voicemail. My father, his initial bellowing rage quickly melting into panicked, threatening messages. I listened to one, then deleted them all. Then a new call came through from my father's number. I answered and put it on speaker. "You ungrateful little bastard," he roared, his voice distorted with fury. "You think you can pull a stunt like this? You think you can threaten your own family? I will bury you in legal fees. I will see you ruined." Before I could say anything, a third voice joined the call as planned. The voice was calm, deep, and dripped with authority. "Mr. Richards," Solomon Graham said coolly. "This is Solomon Graham, counsel for Ethan Richards. I am informing you that this call is being recorded. I would strongly advise you to cease making threats against my client. As of 8 a.m. this morning, a lien has been placed against your property pending the court's ruling. All future communications should be directed to my office. Have a pleasant day." He disconnected his line. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could hear my father's ragged, shocked breathing. He had charged headfirst into a legal fortress he never even saw being built. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably reversed. I ended the call, turned off my phone, and tossed it into the back seat. The first rays of sun were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Felt, in every sense, like a new dawn. The aftermath was not a single dramatic explosion. It was a controlled demolition, and from my new vantage point 2,000 miles away in California, I had a perfect view of the entire process. Solomon Graham was a master of his craft, keeping me informed with concise, weekly emails that documented the steady dismantling of my parents' world. The first wall to go was their legal defense. Fueled by a potent cocktail of arrogance and panic, my parents hired a high-priced lawyer from a flashy local firm. Their strategy was to paint me as an unstable, vindictive child. They claimed the $180,000 was a family loan to support Tyler, a loan I had been aware of and had misconstrued in my anger. Solomon didn't engage in theatrics. In the preliminary hearing, he simply presented the evidence. He laid out the bank statements, the undeniable proof of the wire transfer. He presented the printouts of my stolen research next to Tyler's business plan, a clear-cut case of intellectual property theft. He submitted my Caltech acceptance and scholarship award as proof of the tangible future they had tried to destroy. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, took less than an hour to grant our petition. She issued a court order compelling the sale of the house. In the stroke of a pen, my parents went from being proud homeowners in an affluent suburb to being tenants on a clock that was ticking down fast. The second wall was Tyler's house of cards, Next-Gen Solutions. The initial $180,000, which seemed like a fortune to him, was burning up at an alarming rate. He'd leased a trendy downtown office, bought expensive furniture, and hired a couple of his buddies at inflated salaries. He was playing the role of a tech CEO, but he had no product and no new money coming in. His entire plan hinged on securing a series of funding round from a venture capital firm led by a notoriously sharp investor named Alexandra Wong. She was the kind of person who could be dazzled by Tyler's charisma, but she built her career on spotting frauds. This is where Professor Jenkins deployed his quiet, elegant weapon. He didn't call Alexandra Wong. He didn't lodge a formal complaint. He simply wrote a long, thoughtful article for a highly respected online engineering journal. The piece was titled, "On Derivative Designs and the Innovation Echo Chamber in Robotic Startups." In the article, he never once mentioned Tyler or Next-Gen Solutions. He didn't have to. He discussed, in meticulous academic detail, several emerging technical concepts that were, in his view, simply repackaged and slightly altered versions of established university research. The examples he used were so specific, so technically identical to my prototypes, that anyone performing due diligence, anyone like a VC on the verge of investing millions, would immediately recognize the red flags. Solomon Graham ensured an anonymous tip with a link to the article was sent to Alexandra Wong's head of research. 2 weeks later, the news broke on a major tech blog. Next-Gen Solutions fails to secure funding amidst IP concerns. The article quoted an insider who said investors had pulled out at the last minute after serious questions were raised about the originality and viability of the company's core technology. The public failure was absolute. Without the next round of funding, the company was insolvent. Tyler had to break his lease, sell off his fancy new computers for pennies on the dollar, and face the humiliation of his grand venture collapsing into nothing. The final wall was the one my parents cared about most: their social standing. In their world of country clubs and dinner parties, perception was reality. The bright red, for sale sign hammered into their perfectly manicured lawn was a public declaration of their failure. The news, combined with the whispers of a nasty family legal battle, spread like wildfire. My mother, the successful real estate agent, became toxic. Her clients, wealthy and image-conscious, began pulling their listings. How could she be trusted with their biggest asset when she was being forced to sell her own? Her main business rival, Victoria Chambers, twisted the knife with glee, feeding the gossip mill at every opportunity. My father's position at his investment firm became untenable. The story of him being outsmarted legally and financially by his own son made him look like a fool. His partners distanced themselves. His clients grew nervous. Even my Uncle James, my father's own brother who had always championed Tyler, stopped taking his calls. Failure is an orphan. The final email from Solomon on the matter was a model of brevity. The property at 18 Elm Street closed today for $800,000. After settling the outstanding mortgage, our 40% share is $320,000. These funds have been deposited into the Helen Richards Trust. Your parents have received their portion and, I am told, have moved into a 2-bedroom rental apartment in the Northgate complex. This matter is now legally concluded. I read the email in my dorm room at Caltech, the California sun streaming through the window. It was over. I hadn't just survived. I had won. But the fight had one last round, a final confrontation that had nothing to do with money or law, and everything to do with drawing a line in the sand so deep it could never be crossed. The following year was one of profound peace and intense focus. Life at Caltech was like breathing clean air after years in a smoke-filled room. I was surrounded by people who were genuinely passionate about learning, people who saw my ideas as something to be explored, not exploited. I was a valued member of Dr. Rajiv Patel's research lab, working on projects that pushed the boundaries of autonomous systems. I had friends. I was paying my own rent on a small, clean apartment. I was building my life, from the ground up. The past was a scar, but it was a scar that had stopped hurting. I hadn't spoken a single word to my parents or my brother since the day I left. Their numbers remained blocked. My new number was unlisted. Solomon Graham handled the last of the legal formalities, and as far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed and sealed. Then, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, a year and a half after I'd left, my apartment buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Frowning, I pressed the talk button. Hello. A woman's voice, a voice I knew as well as my own but hadn't heard in 18 months, came through the speaker. It was hesitant, fragile, and utterly foreign in my new world. Ethan? Son? It's Mom. A jolt of ice water shot through my veins. How did they find me? For a split second, the old fear, the old instinct to hide, flared up. I could just not answer. I could pretend I wasn't home. But then I looked around my small apartment, at the books I had bought, the research papers pinned to my corkboard, the life I had built. I was not that scared kid anymore. I would not hide. I'm coming down, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. I met them in the bright, airy lobby of my building, and the sight of them was shocking. They were diminished. All the polish and privilege had been stripped away. My father, Richard, was no longer the confident executive in a tailored suit. He wore a faded polo shirt and slacks that didn't quite fit right. He looked tired, older, and beaten. My mother, Diana, who had always been so perfectly put together, looked frayed at the edges. The lines of stress around her eyes and mouth were too deep for her makeup to conceal. They looked like ghosts haunting someone else's life. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was flat, a stranger's voice. "Can we please just talk to you, Ethan?" My mother pleaded, her eyes instantly welling up with tears. They were the same tears she'd used in the living room that day, but the performance had lost its power. 5 minutes. That's all we ask. This had to end. Here, now. Not with anger, but with finality. "Fine," I said, turning toward the elevator. My apartment. They followed me up in silence, their presence a suffocating intrusion into my peaceful space. They perched awkwardly on the edge of my small sofa, looking around at my modest life as if it were a foreign country. My father cleared his throat and began. "Son, we came to ask for your help. It's about Tyler." Of course it was. "He's not doing well, Ethan," my dad said, his voice raspy with a desperation I'd never heard before. "After the company, well, after everything, he just fell apart. He can't hold a job. He's depressed. We're worried he's going to do something drastic. He needs his brother. Family is the most important thing," my mother added, her voice thick with manufactured sentiment. "At the end of the day, family is all we have. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" There it was. Forgiveness. They weren't here to apologize. They weren't here to atone. They were here to ask me, the person they had wronged, to fix the mess they had created. The audacity was stunning. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I leaned forward, my expression neutral. "Before we talk about helping anyone," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I want to do something. For my own closure. I need to hear it from you. I want you to tell me the story of what happened to my college fund. The real story. No omissions, no justifications. Just the truth." My father started to protest, the old arrogance flickering. "Ethan, we've been through all this in the court filings. It was a misunderstand." "No." I cut him off, my voice dropping to a steely quiet that silenced him instantly. "No more lies. Not in my home. Not to my face. I want to hear it from you. Now." They looked at each other, a silent, panicked communication passing between them. They saw something in my eyes they hadn't seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but absolute control. The game was over, and they knew it. As my mother began to speak, her voice barely a whisper, I rested my hand on my phone, which was sitting on the coffee table. I discreetly swiped and tapped the screen, activating the voice recorder. It was Tyler's idea," she began, twisting her hands in her lap. "He was so convinced his startup was going to be the next Google. He said he just needed a little push, a little capital to get it off the ground. He was so passionate. He came to us with a plan." My father picked up the narrative, unable to meet my eyes. "He pointed out that your college fund was just sitting there, earning minimal interest. He said it was dead money. He argued that you were so smart you'd probably get scholarships anyway. He promised, he swore, he would pay every dime back with interest within a year, once the company took off. We saw it as an investment," my mother sobbed. "An investment in our family's future, in both our sons. We thought you would understand." They confessed it all. The calculated decision, the lies they practiced, the theft of my research, which they waved away as me just sharing ideas to help my brother. They spun a narrative of loving, if misguided, parents who had simply made a bad bet. It was a pathetic, self-serving, and utterly damning confession. When they finally fell silent, the only sound in the room was the hum of my refrigerator. I leaned forward and picked up my phone, making a show of stopping the recording. Their heads snapped up, their eyes fixed on the phone in my hand, widening with dawning, sickening horror. What was that?" my father stammered, his face turning pale. "That," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, "is my insurance policy. That is the recording that guarantees this is the last time we will ever have this conversation. It is the reason you will never show up at my home, my school, or my place of work ever again." I stood up, the motion feeling slow and deliberate. "I am not helping Tyler. I am not helping you. I am not your family. I am a consequence, the one you never planned for." I walked to the door and held it open. "Get out." My mother started to cry, a real ugly sob this time. "Ethan, please." "There is no Ethan here for you," I said, my voice final, leaving no room for appeal. "You sacrificed him for your golden boy. You made your choice a long time ago. Now, live with it." They shuffled past me like two defeated ghosts. I closed the door behind them, and the solid, satisfying click of the deadbolt locking was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of the end. The years that followed were defined by a profound and productive quiet. The silence left by my family's absence was not an emptiness. It was a space I filled with work, with learning, and with building a life that was authentically mine. I graduated from Caltech with high honors and walked straight into a coveted R&D position at a leading aerospace company, designing guidance systems for the next generation of space exploration vehicles. My victory wasn't a single cinematic moment. It was a collection of small, quiet triumphs. It was the patent I was awarded for a new stabilization algorithm. It was the mutual respect I shared with my colleagues, a team of brilliant minds who judged me on the quality of my work, not my family name. It was the simple act of paying my own bills, of furnishing my own apartment, of knowing that every single thing in my life was something I had earned through my own effort and merit. I never had to use the recording of my parents' confession. Its existence was enough. They vanished from my life completely. Occasionally, I would think of them, not with the fire of anger, but with the cold, distant pity one might feel for historical figures who made disastrously wrong choices. They weren't complex villains. They were simple people, weakened by their own biases and egos. They had placed all their bets on the wrong son and had lost the entire house. About 4 years after that final confrontation, I was at my desk at work when a personal email arrived. The subject line read, "An update from the Helen Richards Resilience Fund." A wave of warmth spread through my chest. After everything was settled, I had worked with Solomon Graham to establish a perpetual scholarship fund with a significant portion of the trust money. My grandmother's name was on it, but I had insisted on adding the word resilience. It wasn't a fund for the best and brightest from privileged backgrounds. It was specifically for gifted engineering students who had overcome significant hardship, kids from impoverished areas, kids who had aged out of the foster system, kids whose families had been shattered by crisis. It was for the ones who had to build their own ladders. The email was the fund's annual report. It detailed the progress of the first cohort of scholarship recipients. There was a young woman from rural Appalachia, the first in her family to attend college, who was now a junior in a biomedical engineering program, working on prosthetics. There was a young man from inner-city Detroit who had taught himself to code on a library computer. He was now a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon, specializing in AI. The report included short, anonymous testimonials from the students. One read, "This scholarship wasn't just about the money. It was the first time someone outside my family looked at my situation and didn't see a victim. They saw a fighter." Another said, "Knowing that the fund was created by someone who understood what it meant to have the odds stacked against you, it made me feel like I wasn't alone." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the sprawling campus of the aerospace company, a place filled with people literally reaching for the stars. I thought about my grandmother, a woman who had the foresight to plant a tree whose shade she would never enjoy. She had given me more than money. She had given me a lesson in structural integrity, both in machines and in life. My parents had called me resilient as an excuse to abandon me. They had meant it as a burden. They never imagined I would take that word and forge it into a shield, and then melt that shield down to create tools for others. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I had reclaimed my future, my peace, and my own definition of family. A family not of blood, but of shared spirit, a community of fellow fighters. The ship I had built for myself hadn't just survived the hurricane. It had become a lighthouse, and in that quiet, steady light, I found my true victory. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.